Good morning, everybody. How are we today? Good. Hey, I want to wish you a happy Mother's Day, all of you moms in the room. I wore pink today so you'd feel appreciated. I hope you do. I don't think there's much in the world that is more formational for a person than the love of a good mom. I'm surrounded by several of them. Kenzie's the best. If you're doing that work, if you're raising up whole people into the world, we just honor you. What an incredible work that is, and it feels mundane, and it feels gritty, and it feels like you're spinning your wheels a lot of the time, and you feel unappreciated a lot of the time. But we see you, we honor you, and so happy Mother's Day. Thank you, moms, for what you do. Turn in your Bibles to John 4. That's where we're going to start off. I want to tell you guys a funny story I was just telling the band before the service started. So I'm not good enough at preaching yet to just preach from a couple notes or an outline or anything. So when I prepare, I write out the whole thing, usually on Friday. And that's kind of my way of figuring out okay, how exactly am I going to, get through all this stuff? How am I going to phrase everything? And it's how I get it in my head. And I tried something new this week. There's an app that I tried out called Speechify, where after I typed up the whole manuscript of the sermon, you could upload a Word document or whatever, and it will read it back to you. And so I was thinking man, maybe if I could listen to my sermon, it'll get it in my head. And it lets you pick what voice you want it to read it to you in. And so for the past couple days, I've had Snoop Dogg reading my sermon to me. And so if I start to drift a little bit into an accent that doesn't quite, then you'll know where it's coming from, because I've been rehearsing that way. So, so me and Snoop, man, we're going to preach a good sermon today. So we're continuing our story, our conversation, on fasting. We're in week 3 of talking about fasting. We've been, today's day 7 of our church's 21 days of prayer and fasting. I felt a pretty strong leading for the past couple of weeks really towards one sentence that Jesus says. But because of that sentence, it's kind of taken me to a couple different passages. And we're going to start that journey by looking at the very familiar story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. So John 4, starting in verse 1. Let's go ahead and get to reading. It says this: Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, take note of that, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. And a woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." And Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that's saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." And so what follows this is a really famous dialogue between Jesus and this woman that you have no doubt heard preached a lot. You've got discussion about living water and true worship, and she miraculously comes to faith in Jesus, and eventually, because of her testimony, the whole town of Sychar comes to faith in Jesus and comes out to see what she's talking about. There's a lot in that. Today, I want us to focus on what happens immediately after that. So let's skip down a little bit, pick up in verse 28. So they've had this conversation. The woman goes back to town. It says this, 28, "So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, 'Come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?' And they went out of the town and were coming to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, 'Rabbi, eat.' But he said to them, 'I have food to eat that you do not know about.' So the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him something to eat? And Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and accomplish his work. Okay, so we're talking about the discipline of fasting. And this passage that we just read it's not really what you might call a central text on fasting. I don't really even know if this passage is about fasting at all. But fasting is definitely in it. I mean, after all, at the end, they offer him food. Jesus turns it down. And that's intentional, and that's for a reason. And so he is, even though he's hungry, he's not eating. He is fasting for some reason. Instead, he tells them, and this is the sentence I haven't been able to get out of my head. He says, I have food to eat that you don't know about. I have food to eat that you don't know about. Jesus is describing here a different kind of sustenance, a different kind of nourishment that was beyond the physical. And it was a kind of nourishment that they had not yet learned to hunger for. And the Bible in other places refers to this as the hidden manna. The hidden manna. He says, I have food you don't know about. And even though this little episode, this whole bit about Rabbi eat, I have food to eat you don't know about, is kind of just a funny little episode that feels like an add-on to a really big story, this is what Jesus says here. It's deeply connected to symbolism that goes way back in the Old Testament. And those scriptures, what Jesus says, all that has a lot to say to us today about the discipline of fasting. Because Jesus is fasting here after this conversation with this woman. It's not random. It's a teachable moment for his disciples. It's a teachable moment for his followers. And just like it was a teachable moment for them then, the spiritual discipline of fasting, it teaches us now as well. And so, today, this is by no means exhaustive, okay? As I've gotten into as I've dug into fasting, it's a huge topic. So this is not exhaustive. But today, I just want to go through three things that I feel strongly that we need to discuss that we learn by fasting. Three things that we learn by practicing fasting. Not just by learning about fasting, by practicing the discipline. Not just learning about the discipline. Doing fasting, doing the discipline, it teaches us things. And there are three things that I want to talk about, okay? So three things that come from this text that we just read and the texts that are connected to it that fasting teaches us, okay? That's what we're going to do. So here we go. Number one, the first thing that fasting teaches us is that our souls and our bodies are inextricably linked. Our souls and our bodies are linked. They're not independent of one another, okay? So it's really tempting for us to believe in our modern society that we have, two big parts of ourselves. We have our intellectual and emotional selves, and we have our physical bodies, and the two are independent of one another. But that's not how ancient people viewed the body in the times that the Bible was written. That's not certainly how the Bible talks about the body, and it's not how Jesus talked about the body. The Bible teaches that we are spiritual beings, that we are embodied spiritual beings, right? That we aren't just a soul that happens to be put into this meat suit container that we're eventually going to shed off one day. We are an embodied spiritual being. Okay? The whole part of us, and it means that the outward physical parts of you and those parts of you are just as integral to who you are and living for God as the emotional and spiritual and mental parts of you. The outside is just as important as the inside. And here's why this is important, okay? We often think that faith in Jesus is an activity that primarily takes place in the mind and in the heart. We believe the right things. We trust. We contemplate. We pray. We ponder. We study. These are all things that happen primarily in the mind, happen primarily in the heart. We think that that's where faith lives most of the time. But there's And we also think that there are outward things that we do that they start in the mind, like taking care of others, community service, sharing the gospel, evangelism, service, worship. We think that those things start in the mind. It's the mind that makes those happen. But following Jesus isn't only something that happens in our minds on a spiritual level. It consumes the whole person. Following Jesus is a whole life activity. It's a whole life pursuit. It means that to be a person that God created, even the simple things like what or when we eat or drink, those things come into play. And fasting teaches us this. It reminds us that our bodies and our souls, they're not independent of one another. They can affect one another. Let me show you where I'm getting this from the text, so you don't just think it's just me talking, okay? So in this story, Jesus uses metaphors for food 2 times. Once with the woman at the well, he talks about living water, not regular water, but living water. And once with the disciples when he talks about, I have food that you know not of. Both are metaphors. And both times, the people that he was talking to, they did not get the metaphor. They did not understand the point he was making, which is completely understandable. I mean, it's a little puzzling, and it's kind of hard to keep up with somebody who talks in metaphors a lot. But what happened with both the woman and the disciples is they couldn't take their focus off of what was right in front of them. They couldn't elevate their vision up from the earthly dimension of things. When Jesus offered the woman living water, her response was, well, you don't have a bucket. How are you going to get the living water if you don't have a bucket? And she was looking at what was right in front of her. The physical, the base layer, the dimension, that's what she couldn't see past. When Jesus told the disciples that he had food to eat that they didn't know about, their response was, who brought them a sandwich? Are you smuggling PB&Js in that robe, Jesus? Where are you getting that? Honestly, the Bible's funny, in case you don't realize it. Like, it doesn't all have to be boring, okay? This makes me laugh. And one of the things that really lends itself to the credibility of the Bible in my mind is that the disciples make, the authors of the Bible, they make zero effort in their retelling of these stories to make themselves look smart. Like, if this was all made up, you'd think that they would be like, he said, I have food to eat that we know not of, and we all knew exactly what he meant. But they didn't do that. They embraced their own lack of intelligence when they tell the story. They could only see the earthly dimension of things, okay? But Jesus is saying this. He's saying to them, there is more than what you see. There's more than what you could touch and taste and feel. He's saying there is a whole other dimension of reality than what you're seeing right in front of you. He's saying there is a deeper satisfaction to be had than the satisfaction that you get from your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. There is more than just physical food. There is a spiritual form of sustenance. And this is what's crazy. He's actually making the claim. He's not just saying, okay, there's physical sustenance and spiritual sustenance. He's saying that the spiritual sustenance can actually satisfy physical longing. That's a crazy claim to make. Because our bodies and our souls are linked. They're not independent of one another. There's spiritual sustenance that can satisfy physical longing. Rich Mullins says this in his song, If I Stand. Listen to this poetry. Don't miss this, okay? This is incredible writing. He says this, there is more that rises in the morning than the sun, and more that shines in the night than just the moon. It's more than just this fire here that keeps me warm in a shelter that is larger than this room. There's a loyalty that's deeper than mere sentiments, and a music higher than the songs that I could sing. The stuff of earth competes for the allegiance that I owe only to the giver of all good things. There's more. That's what Jesus is saying. There's a greater reality than what you are seeing in front of you. I have food to eat that you know nothing about. The physical food for our bodies, that is real, that is a need, but there is also a whole other dimension that they weren't seeing, that we're not seeing. There is a spiritual sustenance to be had. And that spiritual sustenance can actually satisfy physical longing. Why? Because our bodies and our souls are linked. They're not independent of one another. That's number one. Number two, here comes number two. Because of number one, because our bodies and our souls are linked and they interact with one another, because of that, there are actually physical solutions for spiritual problems. There are physical solutions for spiritual problems. Think with me on this, okay? What we do with our bodies affects our souls. What we do with our bodies affects our souls. We neglect this often, guys. We think that if we are experiencing a spiritual issue, the fix for that issue must also be spiritual. But that's not always the case. Sometimes there are issues that we can face that manifest themselves spiritually, and they can be treated by physical action. For example, are you depressed? Do you find yourself crippled by a lack of joy? You can go out, you can experience God's creation. Go on a hike. And you can get outside of yourself, and that physical action can treat a spiritual deficit. Okay, sometimes spiritual issues have physical fixes. And the discipline of fasting teaches us this, because the discipline of fasting is a physical discipline that yields spiritual fruit. I want to take you to another passage, okay, that lets us see how this works up close, because I know this is kind of abstract, okay? Turn in your Bibles to Deuteronomy 8. We're going to spend the rest of our time there. So, when Jesus told the disciples, I have food to eat that you know nothing about, or I have food to eat that you know not of, when he says that to them, they probably didn't realize it at the time, but those are very intentional words, and they're calling back to symbolism from the Old Testament. And Jesus actually fleshes this concept out more later in the Gospel of John when he talks about, I'm the bread from heaven, I'm the bread of life. But that's a different sermon. I want you to look at Deuteronomy 8, 2 and 3, okay? This is what it says. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what is in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. So this text is Moses giving instructions to the people of Israel as they're about to enter into the promised land. And he's alluding to the 40 years beforehand that they wandered in the wilderness. And in John 4, when Jesus says, I have food to eat that you do not know, that language is crafted in such a way that it is intentionally referencing and calling back to what Moses says here in Deuteronomy 8 when he says, God gave you manna which you did not know. I have food that you do not know about, manna which you did not know, your fathers did not know. That is an intentional callback. And so Jesus in John 4 is essentially saying, when he says, I have food that you don't know about, he's saying, I have manna. I'm being nourished by heaven. I have a deeper sort of sustenance that's coming directly from the Father. You probably also recognized in verse 3 the line that says, man does not live on bread alone. You probably recognize that from when Jesus quotes it when he's tempted in the wilderness in Luke 4 and Matthew 4. You could pretty strongly make the case that the 40 years in the desert for the Israelites were preparation for them to fulfill their mission as the people of God. And just like that, you could make the case that Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness were preparation for him to fulfill his mission as the Messiah. Israel had 40 years of preparation in the wilderness. Jesus had 40 days of preparation in the wilderness. And that's a deeply symbolic connection. And if that's the case, if that's true, if those two are parallels of one another, then you could also view Israel's time in the wilderness, those 40 years, you could view that as fasting on a national scale. All they ate was manna. There was the quail sometimes too. I don't know the exact mechanics of how that worked, but they were fed with manna in the wilderness. They relied completely on God. It's like a fast on a spiritual, on a national scale. And God used that fasting, a physical burden, a physical discipline, to address spiritual issues in his people. And you see it right here in verses 2 and 3. Look at what God's doing in the hearts of his people through fasting. Verse 2, Moses, speaking for God, says, "You shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you first." The people dealt with a pride issue. They dealt with a stubbornness issue. Those are spiritual issues. And by depending on God for the manna, that issue was addressed. God used fasting to humble them, leading them to depend on him. Look at what else it says right after that, to humble you. And then next in verse 2, testing you to know what was in your heart. Inauthenticity, hypocrisy, being disingenuous with God, these are spiritual issues. And God is addressing those spiritual issues physically through fasting. The discipline of fasting, it has this way of revealing the contents of the heart. We've already talked about, Brock and Colby both mentioned it, that like when you're hangry, like I've been fasting during the day, Monday through Friday, except for Thursday because I gave myself a cheat day. And there's all grace here, guys. I played golf on Thursday, okay, with Jeff Taylor, and so I ate some barbecue that day, and so I'm sorry. But when I've been hangry, your filter goes away, right? We've talked about that. The contents of your heart tend to come out a little easier when you are fasting. Another thing that I've noticed though, on the days that I've been fasting, again, I'm talking like I'm an expert. I've been in this for 5 days minus 1 at this point. But one thing I've noticed is I've been kind of quick I've kind of wanted to just cry for no reason when I've been fasting. It's almost like the emotions that require energy for me to cram down and pretend aren't there, when I don't have as much energy to suppress that stuff, that it has a way of coming back out. Fasting has this way of revealing what's inside. It has this way of revealing what's in your heart. It is a physical discipline that can bring out spiritual truth. And when that happens, when fasting reveals the contents of the heart, you can look at it and you can actually deal with, okay, this is what's going on inside me, and I can approach this. I could bring this to God. I could deal with it. Fasting does that. And God used the fasting in the wilderness, the depending on him for the manna, to reveal the contents of the hearts of his people. Living in a way that's disingenuous with God, that's a spiritual issue. And you would think that since it's a spiritual issue, the fix for it would be primarily spiritual. And maybe it is, but there also can be physical remedies to spiritual issues. With Israel, God treats the issues of pride, hypocrisy, a lack of trust by leading them into this extremely basic, natural dependence on him, by leading them to fast. I would imagine that there are all kinds of spiritual issues that are plaguing all of us in this room today. I would imagine if you're watching online, however you're joining us, I would imagine that there is a spiritual issue that you're fighting right now. All of us are fighting a great battle. Maybe there are some of you today who are dealing with just absolutely crippling doubt. Something's happened in your life that has led you to fundamentally question whether or not there can actually be a God who is both good and all-powerful and who cares about what you're up to and what you're doing. Maybe you have a really hard time reconciling that to what you see right now. Maybe there are some of you here today who are crippled by fear. You look around, you see how the world is, and you're scared. You're scared for your kids. You're scared you don't know what's happening next. You can't sleep at night. You're terrified for the future. And that fear has left you paralyzed and unable to act and unable to walk in your calling. And you've tried spiritual fixes. You've read in the Sermon on the Mount every day where Jesus talks about, well, you shouldn't worry, and it's not helping you. You're trying a spiritual fix for a spiritual problem. It's not helping you. Maybe your faith is lacking. You have all these questions, you have all these doubts, and you're trying spiritual fixes to those things. You're reading apologetics books and you're listening to podcasts. It's not getting you anywhere. Maybe some of you are in here today and you have a habitual sin that you were chained to. There's some kind of destructive pattern, maybe it originated in your upbringing that you just can't seem to shake. And you have tried the spiritual fixes. You've tried praying it away. You've tried having other people pray for you. You've tried reading books. You've tried all the things that you've tried thinking on things above. You tried all that. We've got all these spiritual issues. And we've tried spiritual, mental, emotional remedies to fix them. Have you tried going without food? Sounds real dumb, doesn't it? It doesn't make sense. Have you tried going without your most basic of needs for a set period of time? Have you tried putting your body in a position where at the most basic carnal, guttural level, you are feeling and relying on the provision of God, on the sufficiency of God, on the goodness of God? Have you put yourself in a position where God can spiritually satisfy your very real physical needs and longings? Have you tried that? I'm not saying it'll work, but have you tried it? I'm not saying that fasting is a cure-all. I'm definitely not saying it's fast. Fasting is a slow discipline. So see what I did there? I fell into that one. It wasn't on purpose. Fasting is a slow discipline. And if you rush into it and if you don't start small, it could end very poorly. I'm not saying that fasting is transactional. I'm not saying that if you fast, God will definitely do this for you. All I'm saying is that we forget this a lot, that sometimes there are spiritual issues that we face and there are physical remedies to those things because our bodies and our souls are linked. You can't always think your way out of temptation. Sometimes you have to do something. Sometimes you need to physically move yourself into a position where you have to depend on God because it's a physical action that leads to a spiritual dependence. And fasting teaches us that. Fasting teaches that sometimes spiritual issues can have physical fixes. Last one, number 3. The last thing that fasting teaches us is fasting teaches us to reorient our palate from what is temporal to what is eternal. Fasting teaches us to reorient our palate, what we think tastes good, from the earthly to the spiritual. Look at verse 3. We've already read it once of Deuteronomy 8. It says, "And he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone." There is another source of sustenance that you don't know about. It's not just the bread. It's not just the physical. There is something else. Man does not live by bread alone. Jesus said in John 4, I have food to eat that you don't know about. Man does not live on bread alone. There is more. There is a deeper satisfaction to be had than the physical. There is a deeper joy to be felt than the temporal. There is spiritual food that we don't know. And fasting teaches us about that food, and it gives us a taste for that food. But here's the thing. Here's what I've learned after 4 days. That spiritual food, it's good. But man, is it an acquired taste. Jesus has food that we don't know about, and it's not going to taste like Nerds gummy clusters. That's not what it tastes like. It's an acquired taste. It's something we have to learn to crave. When God gave Israel manna for the first time, their response was, what is this? That's in the Bible. It comes down, they go out there, what is it? That's why they called it manna. It literally means, what is it? It's an acquired taste, is probably what Moses told them. It'll grow on you. The discipline of fasting is the process of us acquiring a taste for the provision of heaven above the provisions of earth. It's the process that we use. It's the discipline of acquiring the taste for God's provision and putting it in priority above what we can see right in front of us. Fasting is the process of learning to like black coffee more than cotton candy. That takes a little bit of maturity. But eventually you get there. Eventually you become an old grumpy man like me, and cotton candy makes your teeth hurt because it's too sweet. And you just want to drink bitter stuff all the time because life is hard. Fasting is that process. Fasting is the process of learning to rejoice in the simple, quiet provision of God. And acquiring a taste for the bread of heaven, it puts the bread of earth in perspective. Because all of this begs the question, okay? If Jesus says to the disciples, I have food to eat that you know not about, and he doesn't take the food that they're offering, and they're like, well, now we feel weird because we're offering you this food and you're clearly hungry, but you're not taking it, and we don't know what to do anymore. And all of that begs the question, like, is Jesus saying that if we are just spiritual enough that our physical needs don't matter? Is he saying that, like, if you had enough faith, you wouldn't have to eat at all? Is he saying that all the physical needs and urges that you feel are invalid and they don't matter? No, he's not saying that. What he's saying is that physical provision, food to eat, feels more urgent to us, but spiritual provision is more important. He's saying that physical provision feels more urgent, spiritual provision feels more important. Church, I mess this up so much, and I'm begging me, don't spend your life enslaved to what is urgent. Don't spend your life enslaved to instant gratification. There's a whole world out there that can give us all kinds of quick hits of pleasure, all kinds of quick hits of dopamine, quick hits of gratification. Walking in the way of Jesus often means forsaking what is quick for the sake of what's important. Because there's more. There's more than just the physical. There's more than just the physical pleasures that we can see and touch and taste and experience. And fasting, the discipline of it, it's not a transactional thing. It's not a way of manipulating God into doing what you want. Fasting is the discipline of acquiring a taste for what is deeper, what is stronger, what is more true than what we can just see right in front of us. Fasting teaches us to reorient our palate so that we acquire a taste for what is important over what is immediate. In John chapter 4, God does an incredible thing through the Samaritan woman at the well. And yet, like, this incredible miracle happens. Whole village comes to faith in Jesus through the testimony of this woman who was an outcast before he met her. And yet, the disciples could not elevate their vision above what was earthly. They couldn't see past what was right in front of them. Rabbi, eat, is what they said to Jesus. And he responds, I have food to eat that you know not of. There is more. There's more than what you see. And so he chooses to fast. He chooses not to take the food that they're offering. And his fasting teaches us, it teaches that our bodies and our souls are linked, that what we do with our bodies can affect our souls and vice versa. It teaches us that sometimes spiritual issues that we face can be addressed by physical action, and it teaches us to reorient our palate from what is temporary to what is eternal. Church, there's a food to eat that we don't know about. There's manna from heaven that's hidden from the rest of the world. And when we fast, we have an opportunity to taste it. To close, I know I'm over time. This is a passage that's really special to our church, and you'll probably see why. This is Revelation 2:17. Jesus speaking. He says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on it that no one knows except the one who receives it. Jesus says, I have food to eat that you don't know about. I've got the hidden manna. Church, we're overfed by temporary things. We often prioritize what is urgent over what is hidden and important. And in doing so, we've dulled our spiritual appetite. But fasting, the discipline of it, it awakens longing. It awakens pining for God. Why do you think all the people in the Bible who knew God the most deeply fasted? Because God and His glory were the ultimate desires of their hearts, and fasting fans the flames of desire. Fasting physically puts us in a position for spiritual dependence, where God Himself is the prize. Fasting awakens longing. And so I just want to encourage you, we're a week into this thing. Most of us are not fasting on Sundays, but as we get into it tomorrow, let's run this race with endurance, because it is a physical discipline that leads us to a place where we could desire God, and we can see what is unseen, that we could taste what is hidden. There's more. There's hidden manna. And as we fast and pray, we acquire a taste for it. Let's pray, and then we'll worship together.